Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Underbrand with Nicholas Kuhne. Hello everyone and welcome to another fun-filled episode. Now I wanted to play an awesome song on air, which you might figure out when I name the guest, but I think we had, copyright strikes on YouTube and various other channels. Too bad. So we've got Mickie Kennedy, who's an expert at helping small businesses, authors, and startups increase their visibility and credibility through Tier 1 press release distribution. And this is going to be an interesting subject. Mickie founded eReleases over 25 years ago. And I suppose because there are a lot of those big Fifth Avenue agencies, but not many regular people can afford those. I think that's probably not Madison Avenue, Fifth Avenue. Anyway, you get the picture. Lives in Baltimore with his family and 2 naughty cats, enjoys British science fiction and has an unhealthy addiction to diet soda, has an MFA in creative writing, and hosts Monday night poetry sessions with a whole bunch of other miscreants. I know you put misfits, but I think we can use miscreants here. So, Mickie, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, Mickie, as we were chatting just before we started, the press release game is a tough one, and you've had over 25 years of working in PR, which is typically the type of companies that send out press releases. Maybe talk to me a little bit how PR or press release strategy has changed over the last 25 years, and go.
Sure. The biggest difference I've seen is the evolution of media. Over 15 years ago, it was blogs becoming more relevant. And the newswire was not very accepting of blogs as a media outlet. I made the case in a few blogs instance where they had reached out to me trying to get journalist credentials with the newswire to get access to customized feeds in the back end. And they're like, but Mickie, these aren't really journalists. And I'm like, I don't think it matters anymore. I said, in the case of the person I was advocating for, I said, he gets more traffic than the leading trade magazine's online presence. And they took that seriously. And eventually they started allowing bloggers to have access. The good news is, I think that they just are much more open now, because I was surprised to learn that there's a lot of Instagram influencers in fashion that have had journalist access to the wires for years. And I follow somebody on TikTok called the Snackalator, who does a weekly roundup of new snacks hitting shelves in grocery stores. And all of his images, he says he pulls from the press releases on the wire. There are still people using press releases. And I think when it comes to major outlets that we recognize, like the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and even the smaller daily newspapers, they do rely on press releases because it's one of the easiest places for them to fish for stories. In the US, we still have basically a duopoly of newswires. It's PR Newswire and Business Wire. The downside to that is it makes them very expensive, but the upside is a journalist, a busy journalist who's being asked to do more with less is able to just look in 2 places. And so that makes it very easy for them. I started out doing email distribution directly to journalists, and now their email inboxes are like war zones because, there's been databases introduced over the years. And it seems when an entrepreneur or a small company pays $15,000 to $20,000 for a database of journalists, they're like, why should we send our announcement only to our narrow industry? When they start convincing themselves, we sell golf clubs and we could send it to people who are editors and reporters in the finance and banking arena, because bankers, they like to golf. And so all of a sudden people's inboxes are just inundated with off-target pitches and stuff like that. And the beauty of the wire is it's still very targeted, and they can go into it and with that back-end access, customize it and make exclusions. So it's just so discreet and perfectly what their beat is and what they report on. So I think for that reason, press releases still play a huge part in the media and PR. And I think that's even why the best PR firms that rely on their small Rolodex and close relationships with journalists still send stuff over the wire, because they recognize the leverage effect of reaching so many people that are targeted to just who you want to reach. You can't replicate that because you just can't sit and pitch 1,000 people, but potentially with a wire, you're reaching just an enormous amount of people.
I think let's go back one step, because a lot of folks listening to this have never sent out a press release in their life. And a lot of young folks that I've dealt with have never had to write a press release or understand the process. What is the difference between PR or press releases and doing an ad on Google or Facebook? Why would you choose to do a press release?
That's right. A press release is an announcement to the media that you hope they'll turn into an article. The goal isn't to have the press release put on a bunch of web pages. That happens a little bit with syndication, but I tell people don't get excited about syndication. It just naturally happens. The release will appear on Yahoo. These aren't high traffic sections of these websites. And in some cases, some of the news sites that syndicate these releases, if you go do a search within that outlet, that release won't even show up. Don't get distracted by that. The goal of sending out the press release is for journalists to transform it and write it into an article. And they're written in the third person. They may have a quote where you talk in the first person, and it's basically the facts of something that you feel is newsworthy. It's usually a milestone, or you've released a new product, or you're celebrating 25 years in business, or you've just won a major award. It can be very narrow and industry specific, or it can be a bit broad, where it might be something that you could see a lot of newspapers and magazines covering it. They do vary a little bit, but to go to your point about comparing them to advertising, when a journalist decides to write about you, it's like almost an implied endorsement. It's third-party corroboration, and it is amazing credibility. And when someone sees an ad, they don't go, "Oh, wow, my what I feel about that company has just gone up in stature because of an ad." But when they see you in an article, that does happen. And as they read it, there's generally an excitement in this whole experience of seeing the article and realizing that it's an article, say, in the New York Times. It's such a signal of trust, and it creates a sea of trust radius. And it's one of the reasons that if you are getting published in an article and you're a consumer product, you will see instant sales, people coming directly from that article, and they just click buy. And then they don't do that with an ad. An ad, you might get 3%, 5%, maybe 10% conversion rate. But I've had people tell me that they've gotten, say, 400 visitors from an ad and over 250 sales. And they're just like, are my stats wrong? And I'm like, not necessarily. In their case, it was a consumer product, had a nice price point. You just click and buy. And that's what happens with an article that doesn't happen with an ad. And the reason is when we see an ad, our blinders go up, and we always click through with a little trepidation of, this is probably not going to be great. And then you're like, okay, it's not too bad. I will put it back in my list and I'll think about it and I'll do some analysis. And what that looks like is I'm going to open a bunch of tabs and compare it with other people. When someone reads about, say, a Kickstarter campaign, and they're learning the story about this person who just said, I was always frustrated that there's nothing like this in the marketplace. There's so many things that are close to it, but I needed it for this specific usage. And so I just decided to make it on my own. And the next thing you know, I want to help support this person. And you click through, and if it's a small price point, you're just like, yeah, I'm backing this guy. This is great. You don't open another window and say, let me check out some of those things that were close, but not exactly what you're looking for. Maybe that's all I need. And in many cases, it's not something I really need. I just want to support this person. And that's the real value of earned media. And that's what we call it in PR when someone chooses to write about you. And it really is an amazing amount of clout. It's a type of currency that you can continue to use. Everybody thinks that the only benefit in sales is from the people who see the article and click through or open a new window and do research about you and then buy. But the truth is, you can actually take that article and put it in front of your own customers and leads and share this big success with you. What does that do? Maybe your conversion rate is 10% of your leads and 90% of your leads don't buy. All of a sudden, you get some of those people reading this article, and maybe they were at 48%, but they needed to get over that 51% line before they decide to choose you. And maybe this article will instill that emotional response and get them over the hump and convert. And with customers, there's something called churn, where every year you're going to lose a certain amount of your customers. People feel like after a while, they have to shop around, make sure they're using the best company, maybe try someone else. And they read that article, they're like, no need to shop around this year. We're with the right company. This place proves it by choosing to write about them. It is a strong signal. You can share these links on your social media. You can get it out there. And also put it on your website. I always tell people to try to create a newsroom. And if that's too big of an ask, if you have a blog, create a category in your blog called newsroom and put all your press releases there, put all your achievements, your earned media, record it. And by capturing it, there are extensions on Chrome where you can take a full page scan of an article and it'll preserve it either as a graphic file or a PDF. Save it as both. You won't regret it. And invariably, it seems like a lot of news outlets every 3 to 5 years, they change their content management system. And a lot of times they just throw out the old content rather than trying to port it over to the new system. And you don't want to lose these articles because they are definitely wins and things that you can continue to use going forward. I had one client who was a carpet company in New Jersey. I can't think of a more non-newsworthy business. And we were able to get them articles in floor and carpet trade publications. And you're right, none of their customers are reading those publications. It's other people in their industry. But what we were doing was trying to get some authority. And so when they were done, they had about 30 clips from a 1-year campaign printed out. It did include their local newspaper and New Jersey Magazine, which is a really great magazine for them. And they put it in this big binder. They called it the brag book. And every time they walked into someone's home and gave them a consultation and a price, they would open it and say, look, we may not come in the cheapest, but here we are in Floor Trade Weekly. Here we are in Carpet World. Here we are in the local paper. Here we are in New Jersey Magazine. We've been around for a few decades. We're recognized nationally, and you're not going to need for us to come back in 2 years and have you move all your furniture so that we can restretch your carpet. And all of a sudden they're thinking, wow, that's a possibility. And they're just like, yeah, when they are making the decision, they're like, this person might be $300 or $400 more, but do we really want to move our furniture in a few years to have the carpet restretched because it wasn't done correctly the first time? And that all this comfort that they have, they're really looking for a reason to say, pick this company. And all of these articles and credibility is that signal of trust that makes that happen. And that's the real power of PR.
I'm sorry I asked. Jeez.
As you can tell, I could talk a lot about this. I'm very passionate about it.
Honestly, we could stop now because you've covered such a huge amount of points that I wanted to touch on. So I'm going to go through them sort of one by one. The important point I think that you pulled out was credibility and trust. And I think when people are thinking about why and when should they use a PR agency or send out press releases is, and my students will hate this, but it's in the customer journey, there's a space for that. And if you understand your customer journey, you understand when you need to do ads, which are just for conversions and hard selling, your 20% off, 50% off, summer specials, etc. And then as you were discussing, there are those proof points. You need those proof points to tell customers, look, we're not the cheapest, but here's why you should trust us. You're not going to make a mistake. And one of the things I often see on companies that I have slightly more trust in is as seen in New York Times, Washington Post, Fox News, CNN, etc. And that adds a tremendous amount of credibility on especially Kickstarter and smaller companies that are, or businesses, entrepreneurs that are trying to get out there and say, look, we're not just hokey pokies or flash in the pans. Look, people are talking about us. So I love those points. Another point I just want to reiterate is the importance of having your press room or that media room, because so many times you want to find information about a company to write about. And I bought a secondhand luxury goods blog and website, and I was constantly trying to find information on all these great brands. And I would have to use PR Newswire and other newswires to try and get this data. And going onto the website, half of them had nothing, very difficult to find, and you end up making up stuff or copy and pasting from somebody else. So some fantastic points there. So let us talk a little bit about some of the successes that you've had, because you've worked on a couple of really cool brands. You've been doing this for long enough, so I'm sure you've got some war stories. And I see you've done releases for Manscaped, which is done really well with their earned media, Squatty Potty, which had a huge rise. I'm not sure where they are now, and a whole bunch of Shark Tank companies. Talk to me through working with companies that have sprung up from nowhere and obviously don't have necessarily millions and millions in media. How do they use PR to amplify some of the cool campaigns that they're doing?
So in the case of Squatty Potty, they were doing a lot of viral videos, and I think like the unicorn and soft serve ice cream kind of thing. And it helped to amplify and put more attention on that, because when something goes viral on social media, only a certain type of person sees that. And for the grandparents sitting at home on the couch watching the news, they don't get to see that. There are a lot of publications that just pull stuff from TikTok and YouTube, and they put it out there so that the older people and people who aren't online and very active on social media can see it. And so press releases help to bring that to attention and to really get that in front of them. Another thing to note is that a lot of startups will start a PR campaign before they start paid advertising. And what their goal is to get some of those wins and get some of those articles and get some of those logos on their website, and then have a press room that has these great articles, and then advertise, because they know that it's going to decrease their cost per conversion, and it's going to make it easier for them to get sales. And it is like systematic that when we get a new startup working with us, they come in and they might do a press release every week to 2 weeks, and they just do a frenzy of releases, sometimes over a 3-month period, sometimes a little bit longer. And then they'll pause it after they've achieved 6, 12, maybe even as many as 20 articles that were out there. And then they curate them on their website. They send them out to other people. They create special graphics with these logos and everything, and they put them on social media, and they just recycle them. And they also make that part of their landing pages. And they just know that at that point, they've proven themselves, and now they're ready for paid ads and be able to get those conversions at a lower cost as a result of that. And I see that time and time again, that I think that the reason startups do it is it works well for them. They know that they have an elevator pitch. They have a unique selling proposition. I've never seen a startup come through that doesn't have a refined, unique selling proposition. They know exactly what they're doing in the marketplace, and they know that no one else is doing it, and they are putting the spotlight on it in a way that the media just pays attention. And so getting media for them is generally pretty easy because of that.
Your point about them knowing what they're talking about is key. And I'm sure you've had lots of clients who've come to you and said, please write me a press release.
Yes. And sometimes
I know I'm sure being guilty.
That. Yeah.
Exactly. Go get me some free media. So the point here for listeners is to make sure that you've got your brand strategy, your positioning, your USPs, and as much information as possible. And with Notion and all of these other platforms now, you can start sticking all of these details about the business in there, kept in one place so that it's easy to share. Now, a challenge a lot of folks come across when it comes to press releases and PR is the balance between paid and media in PR. Often you'll send out a press release and somebody will call back, I'd love to write your article, or here's how much a half page or a full page is going to cost you. How do you balance that? When do you say to a client, okay, you haven't got something really that exciting to talk about, you need to take out a full page or half page ad and you're going to get your press release out? Or do you say, no, we just do unpaid or earned media?
So my take is I'm in it for earned media. I feel like paid placement, it doesn't pass the smell test with me. I'll tell you today that for me and most people who are in the marketing world and PR world, when we see somebody talking or bragging about being in Forbes, our eyes glaze over and it's become meaningless. The first thing I tell someone, if they're like, did you see that? Isn't that exciting? And I was like, show me the page in the magazine. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, these Forbes articles aren't in the magazine. These are them monetizing a blog or some kind of section on their website where these guest columnists and other people play. And it's not cheap. And I think it's really hurt the brand of Forbes. But I also recognize that traditional media is bleeding cash and is trying to find a pivot and a way in which to work. But I don't think that paid placement is it. I do think that there's room for paid communities and members and things like that. But I also feel like there needs to be some editorial standards where someone decides what goes on and how it works. And they do claim that they won't just accept anything, but I seem to have seen things that I am a truist. And I always tell people who they've done a few releases and they haven't worked and they're ready to throw in the towel. And they're like, should I consider paying X thousands of dollars for this one article? And I'm like, absolutely not. If you just follow what I tell you, I have a free strategy masterclass and almost none of my customers have gone through it. I think less than 700 of them. I have 30,000 customers, so it's not a lot, but they're just resistant to go down this path and to be educated. But if you were to do, for example, a survey or study within your industry, everybody that has gone through my process, the least amount of earned media that one press release has created for a client is 4 articles. The average is 8 to 14 articles from one press release. And
that's cash money.
That is. And these are real earned media articles. And it's just a matter of coming up with a few really timely, interesting questions. What would people want to know that's going on in your industry right now at this moment? And I like 16 questions because you can really just play with it. You can maybe pick a couple of questions that are more culture, post-pandemic. Are you dealing with workplace issues, with culture, trying to get people back in the office? But it could also be like the questions you would ask someone if you went to a trade show or a conference and you're like, hey, have you noticed that this is going on in the industry and no one's talking about it? Those can be great questions to ask. And so put together 16 questions. I use SurveyMonkey, 4 questions per page, 4 pages. And the reason for that is if they stop halfway, you've got 8 responses. They stop 3/4 of the way, you've got 12 responses. And on that last page, you can afford to be a little crazy there. I tell people, put a silly question in there. You will not be surprised the number of times that the silly question is the one that wins out that we focus the press release on. We did one for a auto repair shop in Pennsylvania that was looking to get their SEO ranking back because they had to go with a new domain name because the old domain name was attached to the yellow pages. I have no idea how that happened, but all of a sudden their website went dark and they had to start a new domain name. And they just said, how can we get the most authoritative links quickly? And I'm like, you're in the automotive world. If you get links from automotive trade publications, you are going to rank really high, really fast. And I told them the only way that they were going to get those links was to do a survey because they're not newsworthy. But yet anybody can author a survey. Anybody can just do that. We put together the questions. On the last page, one of the questions we asked was, what's the strangest thing a customer left in their car while being repaired? And just had an open field where people put a sentence or two. And we took that link. We went to the Independent Auto Repair Trade Association that they belong to. I think it had 1,100 members. Asked them if they would send it out in exchange for us mentioning them in a press release we would be issuing over PR Newswire. And they know a press release over PR Newswire retails for $1,600. Through us, it's like a third of the price, but it's a national distribution over PR Newswire. And they often will say yes. And in this case, they did say yes. I think about 2/3 of the time they say yes. And the goal is to pick one that's small and independent. You go to the big trade association, they're never going to cooperate. They have their own media. They get PR all the time. They don't need you, but these small and independent ones do. And they exist in every industry. I was on a podcast with someone who is in the PR world. And she goes, well, Mickie, that wouldn't work in our industry. There's only Public Relations Society of America. And I just smiled and said, there's over 470 other PR trade associations in the United States. And she just didn't believe me. But later she apologized because she looked and they do exist. Some are very specialized, like just a state or mid-Atlantic, or they're aligned to some other value like Italian Americans. But there's also a lot that are just like PR firms with small PR firms, less than 50 staff. That's 95% of the industry. That's who you would pick. And just pick one that works for someone that you would consider in your space, not necessarily a competitor, but often they are competitors. And then go to that association, make that pitch, and then have them send it out. The goal is to get 100 responses. And I do tell them up front when I reach out to these trade associations, because if we don't get it and we tell them, they will often do a pitch through social media, maybe another email send. And then once you get the responses, you're going to look at it and say, what's the big surprise here? What's the aha moment? You're going to focus on one question, maybe two at the most in a press release, but do build out a page on your website with all the questions and answers, put some great quotes on all of the responses, make that a resource and include that link in your press release. That's the link that most places are going to include in their article. In the case of the auto repair shop, we just decided to go with these weird answers that people had. We put them on the website. I think we had over 50. And in the press release, we just focused on, I think, 15 or 20, because you don't want the press release to be really long. But we said you can view all of the responses on the website. So a lot of these automotive trade publications ran with it and then linked to it. We got over a dozen automotive trade publications picked up. I think 8 linked to it. They also got picked up in their local newspaper and a few other newspapers and places as well, because it was a fun story. People sharing that someone left a boa constrictor in their car. Someone left grandma in an urn and they had to get her after hours for memorial service. And it's just fun little quirky things like that they weren't statistically relevant, but they were really human interest stories. People were titillated and entertained by it, and they thought it was fun, and it had a little viral component to it. So it did really well. And again, that's something anyone can do. So before I would pay for a Forbes thing, I would do a survey. I would spend the time with the questions. I would put together the release focusing on the 1 or 2 questions where you got the biggest surprise. You're going to have an amazing quote in there by you doing the analysis of why you felt that number skewed that way in respect to that question. And you're the expert now. And you send that out, you're going to get lots of media attention from it, because people like captivating questions and they like to know how people in their industry feel on a particular subject. And so just ask the right questions and it will work every time. And like I said, it just works. I've never seen it fail. And that being said, I had a podcast with a guy that was published with HarperCollins, and surprised they provided no marketing or PR. So he paid to do it himself. And he used a PR firm, said he had a great experience with them, spent $40,000. And I asked after our episode was taped, what did you end up getting from them? You said it was a great experience. And he goes, oh my God, it was amazing. He goes, I got an article in the Harvard Business Review. And I thought for a minute and I said, they don't write articles. They take articles that other people have written. He goes, yeah. I wrote the article and my PR firm submitted it to them and they accepted it. And I'm just like, you got a contract with HarperCollins. You could have written it yourself and submitted it and they would have probably taken it. I didn't tell him that, but that was it. He said that they did also introduce him to someone that he always liked and was really well respected. And he ended up being a guest on his podcast many months later. But I just felt like for $40,000, that's not a lot of value. And yet if they had done a survey and his book was just right for a survey, they would have gotten at least, like I said, 8 to 14 articles if they had done it. And I think if you're taking $40,000 from someone, that's the absolute least you could do. So yeah, there's ways to get the PR. You just have to be more creative. And maybe it's because of my background. I'm a trained poet, so my mind works differently from people. I love to look at every little thing as a challenge. And I do 10,000 to 12,000 releases at eReleases. And I get to see these releases that just have win after win. and I notice the patterns and I think through ideas. And yeah, there are so many ways to do this, but if you just do what everyone else is doing, you're probably going to fail. We get these releases from people who have a new hire, and I can't think of a more non-newsworthy type of announcement. I tell these people, if you want my opinion, you take that person's photo, don't even write a press release, take their photo, write a couple sentences about what they're going to be doing for your company, where they came from, send it to your local paper, send it to a business newspaper or magazine if you have one in your area, and then maybe pick a trade publication or two and do the same thing. The best you're getting is a little on the move section. And I wouldn't spend money to go over the wire for that, because it's just, it's a waste, and it's a waste of an opportunity.
Yeah. So I just need to take this. Hello, Forbes. Yeah, you're gonna have to cancel that. Sorry. So, yeah. On that point, yeah, I think that the industry has changed quite a lot, and I think putting in that effort yourself is important. But again, with any knowledge-based industry, which you're in, basically, understanding the landscape, understanding what the journalists are looking for, what is actually going to catch their attention, is the value that you obviously bring into the table, and crafting it in a way that is going to create some titillation, as you mentioned. You've covered so many points. I actually don't want to overburden the poor listeners with too many amazing insights. I'd really love to chat to you again, where we can talk a little bit about how to structure a press release and maybe go a little bit more into detail. But I think you've covered so many valuable points. I think if folks just listen to some of the issues that you brought up and some of the suggestions you've made, they can get cracking straight away and get over that hump of trying to stand out on social media, Google, etc. This is the way to create your backlinks. This is the way to start getting your name out there in an interesting and relevant way. So we will put a link in the description for your masterclass. So it's a free video masterclass on how to create a winning PR strategy based on PR campaigns of your most successful clients. So I'll put that up now so that you can have a look. And yeah, I hope you folks go through that. I'm going to do it because I'm a bit rusty, and I will definitely get my students to make that as part of the course. So you should get a couple of clicks on that, Mickie. But Mickie, thank you so much for joining us today. It was fascinating. It reawakened my interest and my love for PR. So I'm sure it's going to do the same to the listeners.
Oh, glad to talk with you anytime.
If you have any ideas for future episodes or would like to talk about a specific subject, please let us know in the comment section.